Hello, and welcome to another presentation of Anthropology 390 Mediterranean Archaeology. This week, I'm going to make the presentation relatively short by comparison to other weeks, certainly. Mostly because you actually have a lot of other viewing to do with respect to viewing presentations of your fellow classmates and asking them a question about their presentations. This week's readings focused on the creation of and expression of identity. So I've entitled this presentation Identity. um, the, the images I've got in this first page of this presentation Identity are some of the images that were discussed in this week's reading and last week's reading. I wish that I had the time to go over every single place and sculpture or thing that was Roman and Greek that has been mentioned to you in your readings, but unfortunately that would take most of your undergraduate careers. So you'll have to bear with me that I can only hit on some of the major things. But this particular page shows you a couple of things that have been discussed. Number one, right to the left of the eye of identity here, I have a Republican man with busts of his ancestors. This is key to his identity as a Roman, the male line of his family in particular. Top left here is a sculpture of a Roman emperor that was discussed in your text. The bottom left is a picture of a prominent general from Rome who lived at the same time as the famous Julius Caesar, and that's Pompey. It was discussed in your book how Pompey purposely took on elements of the image of Alexander the Great, which, by the way, is in the top right of this particular slide here. Is a bust of Alexander the Great, and perhaps you can see some similarities. It was a real stretch for Pompey, clearly, to try and identify himself as Alexander the Great. But in the bottom right is actually one of my favorite sculptures, and this is a sculpture that's entitled The Dying Gaul. And this is a Hellenistic sculpture, so done probably the 3rd century BC, and maybe the 2nd century BC. I can't remember the exact date. It's definitely Hellenistic. And so I think that this is interesting for identity too. Granted, this is, I believe, a Roman copy of a Greek sculpture of a man from Gaul. We know he's from Gaul partly because of the way his hair is done and the things he's wearing and the kind of weaponry that's beside him. And although those symbols are important in terms of, what the viewer is expected to see, and those symbols or those way of portraying a person are really evident in all these sculptures that I've shown you on this page. And these are messages and ways of communicating with the people of the empire. Again, this Gaul, I know he's from Gaul, in part because of his torque on his neck. Yes, the man is completely naked, but he can't forget his jewelry. So yes, his torque on his neck, that's a Gaulish implement. And his hair, his wild, longish hair, and his mustache. None of the other pictures, sculptures here, whether they be Roman or Greek. Actually, no, I take it back. Our little emperor up here has a bit of a mustache going on, but it's not normal to see a mustache that being said. Anyway, so dying Gaul, you can see here the wound in his rib cage, and he's depicted as sort of an honorable enemy in a way, strong, thus a worthy enemy. This is in a way glorifies him as a Gaul, but it also glorifies Romans, i.e., yes, as strong as this Gaul is, and he's extremely muscular, Romans are stronger because Romans are the victors. So really this is in part a lecture, where the realm of art history starts to get involved, but we're not just talking about the beauty of the art, granted it is beautiful, but the messages that are meant to communicate to the people who view these objects. And that you don't have to appreciate the art to understand that there's a communication going on. So I want to talk just for a few minutes, real quick here, about our goals this week in our course. Audio videos, we've just got this one. Now, granted, I've put 2 as optional resources for you. One, it's a really, it's a great film called Life and Death in Herculaneum, but it really doesn't tell you too many new things beyond what Mary Beard's film told you. Granted, it's in Herculaneum rather than Pompeii, so you don't need to repeat that stuff. Honestly, I thought the only reason you might sort of click on it, aside from potentially a fascination with Pompeii, and I know many people enjoy, learning about Pompeii. I too was very interested in it and still am, but it's the narrator, the person that's giving you this tour through Herculaneum, is actually the author of the Roman essay you had for this week. So it's kind of fun sometimes to put a face to a name. So Professor Wallace Hadrill does this tour of Herculaneum, which again, if you do decide to watch it, you'll see is very reminiscent to some of the things that were in that Life and Death in Pompeii with Mary Beard. I've also given you a little 2-minute YouTube link at the bottom there under optional resources that gives a 3D reconstruction, soundless reconstruction of the Baths of Caracalla. So we'll talk about those briefly, the Baths of Caracalla in this presentation. So I thought you might enjoy taking a peek into what we think they look like, all with not as crumbling vestiges, but as beautiful buildings of their time. The readings, I've limited those this week, giving you a little break, in part, again, because we have the presentations. So just the chapter in classical archaeology. And, of course, those do come with reading questions, and which I've also kind of limited this week, but I've taken a different approach to them. I've only given, I think, 3 questions per essay, but they're not sort of find the answer kind of questions, i.e., tell me which 2 colors make purple, and look on page 362. No, it's not, and then your answer is red and blue. No, it's not that kind of question. So these questions are a little more overarching throughout the whole readings. I'm looking, the answers are not going to be found in a single paragraph on a single page. So the questions are a bit bigger. And again, much fewer. And then, of course, we have our 6 presentations. I have put those 6 presentations can be located in the links here. I've got the names of the presenters on a table. And for example, if you should click on the first one, you'll be taken to a discussion forum. And in that discussion forum is the actual link to the individual's presentation. And therefore, when you're done viewing it, in that very same discussion forum, you can pose your question to the author of that presentation. And that is where, of course, the author of the presentation will find those questions. And they will choose 10 of those questions, and they will respond to them. They can begin responding to those questions right away. The questions have to be submitted by the end of this week, Saturday, but the responses by the authors, the 10 questions that the authors need to respond to, don't have to happen until the following Monday. So they get just a little bit more time. But there's nothing stopping you from starting the answering of those questions earlier. Uh, let's see, I think that's about it. I've already talked about the optional resources. I did want to make a couple more comments on this week's readings. Yeah, see my sad face here. Sorry. I gotta tell you, I just didn't really like Jonathan Hall's well, I take that back. I didn't like all of his essay, The Greek World, the Creation and Expression of Identity. I've read, several pieces of Jonathan Hall's work in the past, and some of it I've been, really impressed with and inspired by, especially on things like identity. So I thought I would really enjoy this. So I was almost surprised that I really didn't I like some of it, but not all of it. Good points. Well, the good points, I think I'm directing you to those good points with respect to the questions I've asked on your weekly reading questions. Those are the bits that I thought were good and that we should get out of this. As per the assigned reading I've mentioned here, ethnicity and cultural exchange, don't panic when you don't see it on our Canvas page. I didn't realize that I had it left into this presentation because at the last minute I decided to take it out. It was another essay by Jonathan Hall, and while it was quite good, it was actually a very challenging read. And again, I felt like you guys all needed just a little more room this week. So never mind that. So it's been, maybe I'll make a note on the Canvas page. That would make more sense to say that this was initially assigned but has been canceled. Bad points, things I didn't like. I really, I suppose I didn't like them because they're on some of my very favorite topics. That doesn't make sense, I know. So for that reason, I should really like them. But the problem is he got some of it wrong. And since this is my area of expertise, I'm allowed to say, sorry, Jonathan Hall, you don't know everything about everything. And I think that you've got this part a bit wrong. And I tried to figure out what is wrong. And I think it may be that he insufficiently understands the material record. He's, more of an historian than he is an archaeologist. And it really takes years of study to get a true handle on the material record of any one region. So I think he's biting off more than he can chew, suggesting that he understands the whole wide Mediterranean world and everything in it. So it just may simply be that he thinks he's got a superficial understanding of it, but he doesn't have an in-depth understanding of the material record. So some of the statements he makes about it are wrong, in my opinion. He may not be doing all of his homework, again, but it may be out of arrogance, thinking he understands a depth of all things, and when he doesn't. There's lots and lots of things I could sit here and pick out all the bad things or things that I found that were inaccurate in his presentation, but that's a waste of your time. So instead, I've focused those reading questions on those things that are good. And I'll just sort of maybe point out one thing in particular that at least perhaps, even though I could make a long list, like I said, that points out the inaccuracy, and that's given on page 363, where he says that in Central and Western Sicily, they didn't display their material culture didn't display Greek influences until the second half of the 6th century, and that's simply not true at all. He's at least 100 years off. He was at least 100 years earlier, and I could cite multiple archaeological sites that would illustrate that. So anyway, never mind. I'm off that now. And again, I've pointed you to the especially good things. Wallace Hadrill's part, however, the Roman part was, I thought, really, really, really good. I like his essay. I mean, he, as I say here, is a quality scholar. Wallace Hadrill has done, oh my God, he has made his mark, especially with Roman houses in Pompeii and so many other things. He has been a hardworking scholar throughout his whole life, and he, will continue, for the future to be a foundational person with respect to his contribution to the overall scholarship. And sometimes his reading is not always exciting, but it's incredibly good and thorough and factual. But I really, really like this essay. I found his arguments really convincing. And I've got to confess with you that his arguments, they even altered my own perspective on the topic of Romanization. And again, very convincing. So please, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. One other thing I wanted to point out for your readings that really thought, yes, he really gets it. He really gets so much. Is that he understands the concept understands this concept of hybridization. In fact, I think he understands it much better than Hall. But then again, like I said, Wallace Hadrill has probably got 30 years on Hall with respect to experience in the field. So one of his quotes here that I really liked, and I think I even used it in your reading questions, is that to read into the progressive adoption of Latin language, Roman dress, Roman law and customs, and hence Roman material culture and expression of the abandonment of one's identity in the adoption of another, is to assume that only one identity is possible. Right? So you can't really just see a certain toolkit and presume that because that person has adopted that toolkit means that that person has adopted entirely, wholly, that culture that toolkit belongs to and abandoned his or her own previous culture. It's a ridiculous thought. Okay, so that being said, I had to say, well, I wanted to illuminate you or elaborate a little more on one of the many things that were brought up in the two readings that you had for this week. I was tempted to focus in on some of the interesting things that Hall said, certainly about the adoption of various patterns of elite members of society and how that connected with the emerging democracy. And that's all really interesting too. And the Easternizing and the rejection of the Easternizing by Athenian peoples or the adoption of those Easternizing things by the elites. All super interesting stuff. But I kind of decided to pick one of the topics that Wallace Hadrill actually had discussed, especially towards the end of his essay, and that was Roman baths. Right, so he talks about Romanization, and especially in places like Britain, and the adoption of Roman bathing customs and dinner parties, was really brought was the equivalent of Romanizing the people there. It was the downfall perhaps of the Britons to be lured by those temptations. And I thought, well, we haven't really talked about Roman baths yet here. So I'd like to spend a little time talking about baths, showing you some archaeological remains of some baths, and talk about how they were made, who used them, what happened there, etc., etc. So let's do this. So Roman baths, yes. Public bathing was a long-established institution in the Eastern Mediterranean world prior to the Romans ever starting to utilize bath complexes. We've seen baths even briefly here in our own class when we talked about the Bronze Age peoples of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. The top right illustration here is a photo of a Minoan bath. The middle illustration is a picture of a Mycenaean bath. At the bottom is an illustration of a Yurok sweat house, which is another way of bathing, and illustrates my bottom point here that public bathing in the form of sweat baths have been a part of many world cultures for thousands and thousands of years. So the Romans did not invent bathing. The very thought would be ridiculous. The vast majority of Roman baths, however, tend to date from the imperial date. And this would make a lot of sense because during the imperial period, we have Rome contacting those eastern peoples in the eastern Mediterranean. And as we learned from Wallace Hadrill's essay, that Romanization, in quotes, or acculturation was a two-day process. Yeah, 2 days, right? Two-way process. And so you can we can clearly see that the Romans were inspired by bathing establishments that they encountered in the East. The 2nd century is often considered the golden age of baths in the Roman world. This is the century in which we see lots and lots of baths being built and utilized, huge, the largest, most gigantic complexes. The oldest ones, however, are earlier than this, and in fact the oldest bath in Italy may well be located in Pompeii. It was established at the site in Pompeii before it became even a Roman city, when it was before it became a colony of Rome. The largest baths are in the city of Rome itself. I'm going to show you a few Pompeii baths in a minute. So who built these baths? Well, a few baths were built by the state, by the Roman government. But the majority, quite honestly, were built and maintained by wealthy individuals who built them as an investment, right? Because it costs money to use the baths, so they were profitable because everybody needed a bath. People couldn't afford, to have these giant baths. To imagine, perhaps they didn't necessarily bathe every day. There are other ways of bathing, of course. A bucket of water and a sponge can do quite a bit but having some kind of facility where you can immerse yourself in water, well, that is something only for the privileged few. So good investments. I promised to show you a couple examples of Pompeii's baths, but I think that really what's in this slide, these are the 4 baths in Pompeii, and I say in Pompeii loosely because the top 3 baths are in Pompeii. The bottom bath, the suburban bath is technically just outside the walls of Pompeii, but it's also utilized by peoples that are living outside the walls and within the walls of Pompeii. So this is kind of extraordinary because, Pompeii is not a terribly large city. It's certainly no Rome by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact that the city could support 4 public bath facilities is extraordinary. And this shows you one thing for sure, how important bathing was to Roman culture. I also think these 4 baths complex give us an idea of the variation that could be found in bathing complexes. So you can see that they don't all have the same plan whatsoever. We're going to look back a little bit later. We're going to look again at the forum baths and stabian baths and compare where various types of rooms between these 2 baths. But these just give you a bit of an idea of the ground plan of the 4 bath facilities, and I've given you a few snippets about the remains of these bath facilities. Keep in mind that if you ever want to, I'm sure I've told you this too many times already, and you're all very well aware of it, but just in case one or two has not really got the point yet, If you ever want to review my presentations and don't want to hear me drone on about it and just want to look at the slides, I do put up PDF versions. And those can be found if you go to our homepage and you look under resources, there's a list of all the PDFs of all the presentations I've done in this class. So Romans believed that bathing was good for them, obviously. If they can, support 4 large bathhouses in the city of Pompeii, it's obviously a good thing. But they thought that they were good for their health. So they used them for medicinal purposes. They also used them as social centers, meeting places. All right, see you guys at the baths, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go from there. Or, okay, well, I'll see you on Tuesday, next time we have our bath. So they're places where people connect and meet. They're used as places of relaxation and pleasure, not just getting clean. We hear stories of people exercising in these baths, and actually some of the stories are really funny. You hear stories of people, people sort of commenting and narrating on bath experiences, like, oh, so-and-so was there again with his silly little friend, and his silly little friend, the one that always is out there exercising, if he's got some kind of muscular body or something, well, he's so silly. I mean, he squeals every time somebody throws him a ball or whatever it is, so they start making fun of each other. Oh, such and such a person was there again. I swear I can avoid that particular person, and they're always trying to solicit some kind of dinner invitation, and so you hear of all sorts of goings on, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So baths are often meeting places for dinner parties. So it's like, okay, because it's really common for people to bathe before a meal. The Romans, especially about the time in the 2nd century when all these bath complexes are up, it's dinner parties are hugely popular. Anyone, it doesn't have to be incredibly wealthy, but even of median wealth and up certainly would throw these huge dinner parties, and it was a key source of entertainment in which they would try to impress each other with more lavish dishes than the previous dinner parties that had. They were competitions, but yet there was entertainments. It was the highest source of entertainment at the time. So they'd often let's meet up at the bathhouse, and then we'll go on to my place or George's place or wherever afterwards, and have and join in the dinner party we've been invited to. But as I mentioned before about some of the commentary we get about baths, it was evidently, and we get a lot of commentary from lots of people talking about hangers-on, people who weren't necessarily in the in crowd, who were always sort of looking to make political connections perhaps, and always trying to get within the in crowd, and so you might go and hang out at the bath to try and strike up conversations and see if you couldn't get yourself invited onto one of these dinner parties. To hobnob with the best of the best. So, sorts of things that were happening at baths. I'm sure that my little list here is missing many, many, many things. And these are things that we get primarily from commentary, but also with our understanding of the actual physical structures of the buildings themselves. So we know there's a great deal of socializing going on. Women might meet her friends and her other, female relatives there, and men might meet, his friends and relatives and business associates all there. And I've already talked about people trying to get introductions to prominent, influential people. And you might do all those sorts of things at a bathhouse. People might arrange business deals, right? I connect. It's like, okay, so I hear you're looking for, I don't know, what does a Roman look for? wine from the east. There we go. Oh, I just happen to know there's a shipment coming in. Oh, there is. Well, you can. So like, because they're much more social even than a gym today. So people from all types of businesses going and connecting together in the same sort of hot tub, right? So we know that there are places of exercise, poolside or in the palaestra, which is an outside sort of exercise area. So you would do your exercises here as well, or play ball, play games, like ball games or various games. Some of them we don't know how they're played, but you might go and play the equivalent of bowls or something uh, at the bathhouse, at the gym, sort of thing. There would be people there selling snacks. I think of it. I was down at Health Sport and saw that they had that little cafe. But the Roman snack sounds much more interesting. Cake sellers and sausage sellers. Health Sport sells bananas and power bars. Anyway, sorry. Drinking. Yes, you might share a drink. So it's a real social place. You're there with your buddies, playing bowls, buying sausages, having a glass of this, and making business deals. You'd be, personal grooming, perhaps having getting your hair trimmed or trimming your ear hairs, who knows? Singing, brawling. We have commentary for someone who lived above a bathhouse in sort of an apartment. And the things he heard, oh my gosh. So pretty funny commentaries we get from him. Some people say that in some bathhouses there might have been special rooms that where you could pay a prostitute for her wares, and there was also thievery, of course. I don't think clearly only a small percentage of people went with the intention of thievery. It's certainly not a place where everyone will, hey, let's go and do some thievery at the bathhouse, yay. No, but it happened. So you'd put your clothes or whatever in like a little cubby, just like you had for kindergarten, right? Like a little cubby, you'd put them all there, or like a gym locker, right? But it doesn't have a door. It might be just a shelf, or it might be just a niche. And you might come back and find that the pin that held your clothes together is missing. Uh-oh. And of course they bathed, right? Yes, as a bathhouse. So who used these baths and how were they used? Well, there were public baths and there were private baths. Baths are in urban centers like Rome and Pompeii. As we've already said, Pompeii alone could support at least 3 within the walls, 1 outside the walls. But even at Pompeii, some of those huge villas that we had a peek at before, some of those had their own baths within their villa complexes. So, but those people that had those big villa complexes might also use the public baths, again, for any number of reasons, socializing or making business connections. We also see baths in military forts along the frontiers of places like Hadrian's Wall or along the borders with Germany. We had a lot of the Romans had a lot of military personnel permanently stationed at various intervals along those frontiers. And so these would have, villages that would grow around them, but they also had bathhouses. Slaves certainly were, so, the baths were used by the rich, certainly, the middle sort of income people, lower income people even, and including slaves. And the amount of frequency certainly would perhaps depend on affordability. Slaves might be there for two reasons. They might be there to accompany their patron, but they also might be there of their own volition as paying customers. We think that baths perhaps had schedules in which they organized women's days and men's days, or special times when it was just women or men. We also get some references, and there's about mixed genders at baths, and we're a little bit unclear about what this means because they're coming from that particular time, and there's a lot of scholarly debate about this. It certainly doesn't seem to connect with Roman morality at all, but there might be various situations in which it might be appropriate, but we're still trying to tease that out of the literary record. And another thing we're trying to tease out of that record and to understand better is to how how much people were clothed or not clothed. Some people argue that they're wearing that most people are wearing some kind of bathing garment, like perhaps just something to cover, genitalia or something. Others argue that they're completely nude. Certainly, the Greeks had if it was in a Greek situation, I couldn't imagine them wearing any kind of clothes. But Romans have their own separate set of morals and opinions about nudity. Sure, they appropriate the nude male, in art as a heroic figure, but it'd be quite another thing for males to walk around nude. That would be something else altogether. We also have that one particular mosaic from Sicily that dates to about the 2nd century, again, this golden age of baths, in which we see women exercising. The only one we have, I've already shown it to you some weeks ago, the only one we have in which women are wearing almost sort of bathing suit type things and exercising, all things you might do in a bath setting. So anyway, the jury's still out on some of this stuff. Certainly you'd have to access your body to clean much of it. And especially much of your body would have to be naked to apply the oil. Romans had hot pools to immerse into, cold pools, but the actual cleaning was done using olive oil and a strigil. I should have gotten you a copy of a strigil. I'll maybe put one on our Canvas page, just a little picture of a strigil. And it's basically kind of a dull curved knife. Call it that. Yeah. Well, we'll have to look at. I'll get you one to look at, in which you scraped off the dirt and olive oil off your body. So you would first rub down your body with olive oil, then scrape it off with this strigil. And you can't do this with clothes on. Granted, you could wear some kind of little loincloth or something. So, again, jury's still out as far as how naked people might have been. So the physical environment at a bath, yes, I talked about places you could immerse yourself. And I'm going to talk about some of those here, but certainly we can look, if you think back to those images I showed you of the 4 baths in Pompeii, 2 of them are here, right? Forum baths and Stabian baths. You can see that you recall that I pointed out that there was, all different ground plans. There was no specific ground plan, but there's a couple of commonalities that they have, that all baths will have, regardless of how they configure everything. And so these give us a pretty good example here, the Forum baths and Stabian baths, how you might have had some similar components. So I've made a little list here of some of the typical rooms or areas within a bathhouse, bath complex. A frigidarium. Think of that frigid, for freezing, frigid, cold. Yes, this is a cold place. So this is a place that you would go actually after the hot place. The hot place is the caldarium. And so both of these, the foreign baths and the Sabian baths, have a caldarium and frigidarium. So here's your frigidarium here in the foreign baths, and here it is here in the Sabian baths. You can also notice that in both situations, that room is circular, right? So there's another common element about that particular room in a bath. Caldarium, that hot room, both of these baths should have a caldarium. Here, E, right? Caldarium. And then the other one, 7 here. Again, I want you to notice that this is an apsidal room in both cases. Very interesting. Tepidarium, a warm room, right? So the frigidarium and the caldarium both have tubs, both have big sort of basins of water in which you can immerse your body in. The tepidarium usually doesn't, it's just a warm room. So let's look at the tepidarium, and here we have in D here on the foreign baths is our tepidarium, and you notice that that's basically right next to the caldarium. Here it's number 6. Again, it's right next to the caldarium. And another place would be the palaestra. I've mentioned the palaestra before as a place that you would do your exercises. Here it is here, this sort of grassy area with a portico, right? Again, it's a bigger one here, grassy area with a portico. So basically columns all along here, and then in this narrow place would be like probably a covered walking area on both of them. A poditarium is an important one. That's where those thieves might be active, right? The place where you're going to put your clothes in the little cubbies or shelf. You can see this one in the foreign baths have 2 apoditariums. One presumably is a male apoditarium, and one is presumably a female apoditarium. The Stabian baths not have a female, both male and female apoditariums as well, but the Stadium baths, I forgot to point out to you, also have a specifically female tepidarium and caldarium. So perhaps, and this is, perhaps in the Stabian baths, we have a situation where men and women could both bathe at the same time, but in different parts of the facility. Whereas perhaps there are 2 changing rooms here, one for men and women in the foreign baths, but maybe use of these public areas are happening at separate times. Again, we're not really sure. Wanted to talk very briefly about how these houses are heated. It's basically an ingenious system called a hypocast system. We have it's under the floor heating. So here is an example of an excavated hypocast system. So you see these pili with these piles of stones and hold up a floor that is then covered and tiled, or like this one is. This allows lots of space inside here for hot air to flow, and you can see here that and you can't see it in this picture. Let's see, but at various intervals we have these areas where you actually make the fires. So there'd be slaves down here tending these fires. And so it would be really hot down here, and the hot air would flow in amongst these pillars. Here's another one here, has been excavated. You can see the floor of the structure with a mosaic, but underneath that floor are these pili, these piles, right, that allow that hot air to flow through. So thought it'd be good to have one example of a bath, and why not choose like one of the most fabulous examples of all Roman baths, and that's the baths of Caracalla at Rome. So when I mean fabulous, I mean fabulous. This is a ground plan for the baths, which is extraordinary. So the buildings, most of the structure is here, and then they have, it's surrounded by beautiful gardens and so forth. And I'm going to show you more pictures of what's left of the baths of Caracalla. But first I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the kind of decoration that would have been found in these baths, especially the ones of the 2nd century-ish that are really highly, highly decorated. That you would find throughout, like you do at the baths of Caracalla, dozens of columns everywhere in various sizes. They're pretty easy to even just see in this picture. Every place you see a round dot or a square is a column. These columns are fashioned from marble and other imported stones, so opulence. There's floors and walls that are, many of which are covered with multicolored stone or marble. Some floors are covered with various mosaics. Some are in like sort of geometric patterns. We'll see some of those at the baths of Caracalla. Some have narrative scenes on them. We also have evidence for brightly painted stucco, right? Sort of three-dimensional decorations coming from walls and ceilings and so forth. At the baths of Caracalla, we have over 100 niches for statues. So little indentations into walls and stuff in which you would have placed, which there would have been statues exhibited. Let's see. There was also a lot of freestanding statues just standing around in the rooms as decoration. And all these statues were painted, and some were even gilded with gold. The building itself was also fitted with numerous bronze and copper elements. So super beautiful, expensive to build, gorgeous, expressed opulence and luxury, and yet built by a private person and was profitable. So, apparently enough people bathed frequently enough that, you could afford to build something like this and then still make a profit from it. Exterior had niches, more niches for statues and for fountains. Had various doorways framed with like big giant granite columns and carved entablatures. The south upper portion of the facade supposedly was covered with a glass mosaic. So just the place would have been stunning to look at. Here's a couple of pictures. I'll also have some mosaics and so forth. This is quite a good plan because it shows not just the ground plan, but kind of gives a three-dimensional quality of it and talks about the areas that might have been used for some of those typical bath areas. Remember, we just talked about a palaestra here. They spell it differently. Don't be put off by that. There's the caldarium is one of the words that we recently just talked about in terms of an area of the bath. You see here, it's also circular. Frigidarium, we talked about that. Tepidarium, we talked about that. And so this tells you, I'm sorry, it's in Italian, forgive me. Latrine still means latrine, if that helps. Cistern, I mean, it's just got an extra E on it. Um, yeah, library, right? So anyway, so various rooms. So here's the remains of the Baths of Caracalla. Here's a frontal view here, and here is an overhead view, so we can look inside. They're really, really huge complex. Let's see, can we see anything special? Lots and lots of lovely Roman arches, which is of course to be expected. Here we can see some of those niches, right? Talked about niches throughout where you could place statues. Here is a reconstruction done of this exact wall. Here would have been this column, and then in these niches would have been statues much like the one seen in this picture. Here's some examples of mosaic floors. I said that some come in, geometric patterns, as you can see in these. This is a huge amount of space to have to do in mosaic. Again, very expensive to do that. But if you look in this picture on the left, you can see some examples of mosaics done with narrative scenes on them. And this is our final slide. At least I'm under an hour, a little longer than I meant to, sorry. The baths generally seem to gradually disappear after the fall of the empire. And yet their legacy remains today and can be experienced at Turkish baths or hammams. Some might say that the Romans loved their baths to a fault. Some might say that they were the greatest incentive to become Romanized. The following is an epitaph by T. Claudius Secundus, which really may say it all for those that loved their baths too much. According to Claudius Secundus, baths, wine, and sex ruin our bodies, but they are the essence of life. If you're interested in learning more about baths, you might consider looking into the 2 suggested readings I've put at the bottom of the screen here by Fagan and Frickett. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to connecting with you again soon.